thank you so much for joining
Good
us.
to be
Thank
back.
you, sir.
How are you? Good morning.
So Axios is everywhere, and I have sources that say that you still go to congressional baseball practice.
I was there this morning. Roger Williams is our coach. We start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not a morning person, but get out there every day. It's actually a lot of fun to get out and move around. I'm a little more mobile than last year, so we're trying to just keep getting better. But I do physical therapy a few days a week to keep building up strength.
And this conversations with your colleagues indicate to me that this baseball is no game.
It's serious business. You know, it's a very fierce rivalry. The Republicans have been playing the Democrats in this game for almost 100 years. And it actually, you get over 10,000 people come to the Major League ballpark. And just how cool is it to be able to play in a Major League ballpark at Washington National Stadium? But we raise about $500,000 every year for local charities here in D.C. And it's a great way to build relationships, not just amongst the Republicans on the team, but we actually get to be good friends with the Democrats. And it's competitive, but it's a friendly competition. We want to win this year. We're going to win this year. But you know, Cedric Richmond might not even make the whole game, and we're going to see that. No, we do a little trash talking as well.
Okay, down to business. You used to have House Majority in your title. Now you have House Minority in your title.
House Republican whip.
What can you do besides make noise?
Well, obviously being in the minority is a lot different, and the biggest difference is you don't set
what's the worst part of it?
You don't set the agenda and the things that we would like to do and move through the House and through the Senate and get to the president's desk to keep getting this country back on track. You can't do that because Nancy Pelosi is the speaker, and clearly she's got a very different agenda, and her conference is even more, I think, radically left than when she was speaker last time. And so we do have some limited tools in the minority, and we've been making, I think, very good use out of them to show the country what we stand for in some important issues.
Yeah, so you personally, as the House Republican whip, have had success on the floor using some of these limited tools. I don't want you to talk about motions to recommit. You may not say that, but what has your approach been to using any muscles or levers that the minority does have?
Well, the first thing that we want to do is show the contrast between our conservative principles, why they're going to be better to keep the economy going. And we're seeing great success in the economy because of what we've done. And then you look at some of the bills that Nancy Pelosi has moved through. They've been very far left. And it's an important contrast to show. And so when we use some of these other tools, we want to, number one, make sure that we can show people what we stand for and how it contrasts with some of the things that Speaker Pelosi is bringing to the floor.
After the Mueller report came out, you said that Democrats owe the American people an apology. You just heard Chairman Schiff. I don't think you got it.
Well, you know, it's almost like they're doubling down and ignoring what was in the report. And the important thing to note is for 2 years, they were running around promising the American people that there was collusion. Don't worry, we've got stronger than circumstantial evidence that there was collusion. Well, there was no collusion. And if they had this evidence that after almost 2 years and tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money to go and look for it, they didn't find any. And so if they've got some secret information, they should have come up with it, but there was none. And so instead of admitting that they were wrong, they just continue to go down this rabbit hole of, you know, now let's hold the Attorney General in contempt. I think this is probably the first time in the history of our country where somebody was held in contempt of Congress for not breaking the law. Because if the Attorney General were to have complied with their request of Chairman Nadler and his committee, he would have been in violation of the law. That's how ludicrous it is, and yet this is where they're going. Instead of focusing on, think about this, there is a crisis at our border. In many days, we're having more than 4,000 people cross the border illegally. Jay Johnson, who was Barack Obama's Homeland Security Secretary, said it was a bad day for him when he saw that the day before over 1,000 people crossed illegally. Today we're seeing more than 4,000 cross. And the Committee of Jurisdiction, you would think, would be holding hearings on how to solve this crisis at the border. And instead, they're holding hearings to hold the Attorney General in contempt and continue to go down this witch hunt rabbit hole.
So the president is pursuing a run out the clock strategy with the House majority. We're the top story on Axios today quotes an outside advisor to the West Wing saying that the idea of refusing document requests, subpoenas, is not an opening bargaining position. That isn't how this president does it, but that's administration policy. Is this approach going to work?
Well, I think the president's been right in number one, complying with the law, but also in focusing on doing his job. He was elected to help get this country back on track, and it's working. I mean, just last week we saw some of the best jobs numbers that we've seen in decades, 49-year low of unemployment, wages are up for hardworking families. These are the kind of things we should be celebrating, and instead, Nancy Pelosi's agenda is to reverse that, to push a 70% marginal tax rate, to have a Green New Deal where they literally ban fossil fuels, and in 10 years you can't fly around on airplanes, and they get rid of cows. I mean, this stuff is laughable, but this is what they believe in.
So, excuse me.
So that's the contrast, again, where President Trump he's going to be in Louisiana next week to highlight one of those great energy successes. We're exporting liquefied natural gas. We're helping our allies around the world, by the way. They don't have to get their energy from Russia and other countries that we don't like. They can actually get American energy. It creates jobs. It lowers their electricity rates. It lowers our electricity rates. And you see Pelosi's agenda is to reverse that.
Are you surprised that Democrats haven't moved faster on impeachment?
Well, I know that they're still moving towards impeachment, whatever the speed is.
They say they're not.
Well, they're scared of it. I mean, Nancy Pelosi knows it's a losing issue for them. It's something they shouldn't be doing. Yet all of her liberal lieutenants underneath her keep talking about impeachment, even though there's no fact to back it up. And look, this is what angers people the most about politics. There are real problems that people want us to focus on solving. And Pelosi got the majority, rightfully or wrongfully, on messaging, but they now have a responsibility to govern, and they can't. They didn't even pass a budget. We passed a budget out of committee every single year in the 8 years we were in the majority. They've already missed the legal deadline and have no plans to bring forward even a budget.
Do you think that they ultimately will move to impeach the president?
I think they will. I think their base is so rabidly anti-Trump, and to govern over hatred of a person is not the way you should use your power. It's an abuse of power, but I don't think they can help themselves.
So, Congressman, when you and I were pre-gaming, the first issue you said you wanted to talk about was health care. And I think people in both parties would tell you that health care is part of the reason that you have House minority in your title. How can Republicans get back on the offensive on that issue?
Well, I think we didn't do a good enough job last year of letting people know what we stand for in health care. And, the Democrats brought a lot of things that were inaccurate and lies. I mean, pre-existing conditions, we want to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And in fact, we've brought forward a number of proposals that would help people with pre-existing conditions and all families that know they're paying too much in healthcare. The biggest problem in healthcare is that people are paying too much. In many cases, they're seeing 20, 25% increases every year. People with pre-existing conditions many times have like a $10,000 deductible. That's not access to care. We ought to focus on lowering premiums and helping those families that are struggling and can't even afford the health care that they have.
Republicans, for sure, were slow to recognize the power of that issue.
Yeah, and a lot of members that didn't respond to the attacks. I mean, you had Michael Bloomberg alone spending $2 million a week in some of these races for 3 weeks in a row. I mean, you have $4 million spent against you before you start responding to an attack, even if it's a lie. By that point, it's too late. And that happened to a lot of people where they were flat-footed. That's not going to happen again next year. And I think you're already seeing a very fierce debate on what our plan is to lower premiums while protecting people with pre-existing conditions. And the Democrats' plan is what they call Medicare for All. If you read the bill, it actually gets rid of private health insurance. Over 150 million Americans would lose the private health insurance that they have and like. And by the way, people on Medicare today, they know Medicare is going bankrupt. We want to save Medicare from bankruptcy, but Medicare goes bankrupt quicker if you put over 150 million more people on Medicare. It literally clogs up the lines and ultimately will bankrupt a lot of hospitals. It's a horrible idea, but that's the Democrats' plan. And so there's a real contrast that you're going to see over the next year and a half.
Speaking of spending, the president, one thing the president wants to spend money on is infrastructure. There's conversation about a $2 trillion infrastructure package. You have said that's too expensive.
Well, the bottom line on infrastructure is this is an opportunity for us to come together in a bipartisan way and pass something really important for the country. But we have to have an agreement on how to pay for it. And I know when you saw the speaker go down to the White House a few weeks ago with Chuck Schumer, they talked about how much they want to spend, but they didn't talk about how to pay for it. And we've had discussions, Republicans and Democrats, on ideas of how we can come to an agreement on an infrastructure bill that helps rebuild our country's infrastructure. You've got, by the way, you've got to have reforms to the way we do building projects. I mean, in many cases, a project takes 10 years that should only take 2 because of so much duplication. And you have a permitting process at the state level and then duplicate it at the federal level, and they throw things on top that actually jack the cost up to a point where you can't afford it. Those reforms need to be in place too, but we need to agree on how to pay for it.
AP reports some senior House lawmakers, frustrated by a decade of frozen congressional salaries, are quietly exploring whether to accept an annual pay raise they've shunned since Barack Obama was first president. Would Republicans support that?
Well, first of all, if you look, I mean, what Congress has paid ought to be publicly known. It ought to be fair compared to what what other things are out there in the economy and how the economy's doing. But the bottom line is we've got to make sure that we can attract good people. And you're seeing good people step up to run for Congress. I know we're doing a very good job right now of recruiting, but you don't want it to just be a place where either the ultra wealthy or only people that are lower income can afford to run. You want to make sure that you're being able to encourage everybody of all walks of life to serve in this great body.
So you're not taking a position, but you're not ruling it out?
Well, ultimately, we're focusing on a lot of things that need to be confronted right now. And at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that we can continue to run an effective Congress.
You open up your campaign website, the first words it says, pro-Trump, conservative leader. What are the hardest part of those first 2 words?
I think the biggest part of how President Trump is perceived is the misunderstanding of what he is like as a person. I get to work with him on a regular basis on policy. I mean, we worked very closely on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, a great achievement that I started working on when I was still in the hospital. He would call me from the hospital when I was there just to check on me. 8 o'clock at night, I'd get a phone call, and it would just be the president calling to see how I was doing. He came the night I was shot he and Melania were there to help console my wife, Jennifer. And, they gave a tour of the White House to my kids when I was in the hospital. That's how he is on the personal side. People don't see that side of him. And so I think there is a lot of misunderstanding about what he's really like. But I enjoy working with him, and I get to see that personal side.
He is a caller. What's it like to have that call pop up?
It's an interesting number. It's a kind of a weird looking number. It's not a traditional 10-digit number with an area code. But you have an idea when that comes in that, my wife was actually in the hospital one night with me when the call comes in, and she goes, "Oh, that must be some telemarketer, don't answer it." I said, "No, you never know who it's going to be, and this is the White House where you hold for the president." She goes, take the phone.
As we say goodbye, I've hunted for deer. I know people who hunt for birds. You recently shot an
Elk.
Come on.
It was about an 850-pound elk. I took my son hunting with me, and it's fun to be able to take Harrison with me in hunting. I'm glad that he likes coming with me too. We've gone duck hunting now and elk hunting, and it's great meat, by the way. It makes great great grilling for the backstrap, the sausage. You can make great elk sausage too.
Congressman Scalise, it was an honor to have you on the Axios stage.
Thank you. Great being with you.
Thank you for serving the country. Appreciate it. Thank you.